Good morning, good afternoon, good evening guys, gals and gentlebuds, and welcome back to the shed, the workshop. We're with Morty. Today we're going to be repairing the floor pan. So in the last video I cut out all of the rot and I've replaced the worst sections of the chassis rail. So today I'm going to be making the floor pan itself and get that welded in. Let's get to it. Right, so I've cleaned up the welds. Now if you have to dress your welds back with a grinder because they're ugly, you're not a welder, you're a grinder. I've dressed them back simply to give as flat a surface as possible on that repaired section for the floor pan to go down to, because I want to plug weld through the holes that I'll put in it. I've given it a coat of weld through primer just to give that area some protection, because obviously once I've welded the floor pan down on the top of that chassis rail, I can't get any paint in between the two panels, so I just want to give it a bit of protection. Weld through primer is a specially formulated paint that you can weld through, exactly as it says on the tin. So it's time to make a template and then we'll get and cut out some steel. Okay, so I've already made a rough template, so that sits nicely in there, and we'll run up there, put a flange up onto the footboard. It's a bit short here, so I've marked it plus 20 that way, and I need a flange up this side to weld onto the inner sill. I've marked it as plus 10, but I think I'm going to go plus 20. So I think what I'll do is I'll transfer that to another piece of card with the additions, and then we'll try that in and see how we go, and if that looks like a good fit, then we can transfer it to some steel, cut a sheet out and get welding. Right, so I've transferred the shape to a new piece of card. This is thinner card, this is just air filter boxes, but they're perfect for this. The thicker cardboard doesn't bend so easily, so now I've got a slight kick up on the floor roughly along that line. It cranks up this side. I've just made a few cuts with the scissors just to allow for where it folds. I've drawn the line where that flange folds up. What I want to do is run the vehicle up in the air now on the lift, get underneath and just mark around the cut line on the underside of the cardboard, because from about here to here I want to put a jodle on the repair panel. And I want to see how close I am to these edges. So let's get it up in the air and have a look. In the last video I mentioned that putting Morty on the big lift was a bit sketchy, and this is what I mean. So it's a 6.4 ton lift which is set up for bigger vehicles, motorhomes, and as you can see I've only got half a tyre on the platform and there, and I get about 3/4 of a tyre on each side at the front. So, but as long as it stays there and the handbrake's on, it's not going anywhere. That's all good, isn't it? Right, so there's my patch, panel, pattern, whatever you want to call it, from underneath. And I've placed a couple of strong magnets on top, one here and a few around the edges. Now you spotted in the previous shot. Right, let's go and lift that off and see what it looks like. Right, so that's the underside of my floor pan. Now if I flip it over to the top side, it was down this side that I wanted to do a jodle, and it wants to be about 200 mil long, which is there. But I only need 10 millimeters. So if I flip that over, so it's a 200 mil long Jodle to there. Now that is more than 10 millimeters. So what I need to do is mount that back. 10, 10, 10. Simply because the jodeling tool only does 10 millimeters depth. So if I've got too much material there, too much metal there, it won't jodle to the line that I want, because I want the step of the jodle to be at the edge of the original steel. So we'll cut that. Like so. And I've got my fold lines for the floor pan. And those all fold up, but we'll sort that out when we've got the steel cut. Right, lay that on there, line that up to the edges. Pop a magnet on to hold it in place. Move slightly. So if I pop a couple of welding magnets on, that should give me a nice strong clamp. So if I draw around with a nice sharp pencil, that should give me a decent line to cut to. I'll just mark the cuts where I've got to cut in. Because they flange up on a curve, parts are going to have to overlap slightly. And there we have the pattern. So if I just mark that point, because that is a fold line and it wants to fold upwards. So if I just do a dashed line, that tells me it's a fold line, not a cut line. And that will need to fold. That will be a fold along there. That one there. I suspect we'll need a cut about there. Yeah, I think that should do us. Right. Time to cut that out. Now you may have noticed in the last video that I've got a new tool. Who doesn't love a new tool? It's a Nibbler, it's battery powered. It's only a cheap one from Lidl, Parkside brand, but they are quite good tools actually. The beauty of a Nibbler like this compared to the air shears that I've used in previous videos is these can cut curves. Not so easy with the shears, they tend to prefer to cut straight lines. And there we are. Another thing, as I said in the last video, if you're using a Nibbler, watch out for these. This is what it cuts out. It's just a little tiny little horseshoe of sheet steel, but it's like razor sharp, tiny points on it. So always try to use it in an area where you can clean those up, and a magnet's the easy way to clean them up. Right, so that's the basic shape cut out. Pair of snips, and we can make those cuts that are marked. And we also want to do that jodle. If you're using a jodeling tool, make sure you're jodeling the right way. I want the step up, so that's the sheet metal in to there. So that way up will give me the step up. If I did it that way up, it'll give me a step down. Step up's what I want, so we'll go that way. Sometimes it pays to just not try to do the full depth in one hit. Go along it and then come back, repeating the action to get the full depth of the jodle. And that's gives us a nice step there. Now I need to fold the flange up on that side, so I'll take it over to the folding press, and then these front edges need folding up. I've wandered a bit with the cut along there, but it's not a big issue. It'll do the job nicely. I think I'm going to leave folding those up until we've offered it in, because I can possibly get the basic bend by pushing down on the panel against the vehicle. Let's go to the folding press. Right, here we go. I only want to fold up to that edge. That doesn't look too bad. It's folded that corner up, but that's not a problem. We can straighten that back out. I think it's time to offer that into the footwell. I was jumping ahead of myself. I forgot that we need a fold along that line as well. But it's not a full 90-degree fold. It's about 20 degrees, I would have said. Something like that. Let's see what that looks like. Right, just before I put that in, I just want to start folding these up. So, using a lump hammer as a dolly just holds that so that I can just tap the flange up. Right, so we just measured the distance from that back edge to the fold up of the kickboard, 510 millimeters. Sorry, 507 millimeters. If I mark there, because that jodle isn't necessarily up the flange. I can nip that bit out. And once again, that then gives me the line to fold to. Probably need to nip these cuts into bigger V's to allow the folded metal to shape up for me. Let's see what that looks like. Right, so with a bit of judicious twattery from a knocking stick, that's not bad. I've got a reasonable shape following around here. Got a bit of a gap here because that's got a repair panel on there already which has stepped it out a bit, but I can, once I've got the startings of welding it in, I can hammer that back to meet the sill, the inner sill, and weld along there. So I'm going to punch along there for plug welding, and that is basically the line of the chassis rail, so I should be drilling 6mm holes probably about that sort of spacing, 2 to 3 inches apart, to plug weld through there, and I'll probably do a few down the middle. I think 2-inch spacing along the outside and maybe 4-inch down the middle, and that should do us nicely. So I'll punch through there as well, so I can plug weld that and weld at the edge, and then weld along here and weld along there, and that should do the job nicely. Lovely stuff. Right, I'll go and drill some holes. Right, so that's my floor pan pretty much made. I've drilled all the holes, punched all the holes around the edges that I want. A few more bits of preparation before I start welding. And I want a few words about welding with you pretty quickly. But first and foremost is to make sure there's no contaminants on there, grease, oil, dirt. So I'm just wiping it over with a bit of paper towel with some brake cleaner on. Brake cleaner is a great degreaser. If you get any grease, oil, paint, dirt, any contaminant in the welding area, it will ruin your weld. You won't get a clean weld. You'll end up with porosity, bubbles, snotty blobs, all manner of horrors. So just degrease your panel before you start. And you also need to prepare the metal that you're going to be welding to. So that means removing old paint, rust, debris, anything that's, you need to get it back to shiny metal as best you can. So I've used a combination of that, which is it's some sort of fibre wheel with carborundum embossed into it, embedded in it. It's great for stripping paint, body filler, rust. So that and that, which is a flat wheel interspersed with finishing pads. So they do a good job. And a wire wheel, wire brush on the drill. Right, so that's your preparation done. Got all that done, we're good to go. Right, a little bit about welding. A few people, since the videos about doing the fuel tank and the weld repairs, a couple of people have commented on my welding abilities. Quite favourably, I'm pleased to say. First and foremost, I have to say a lot of it is down to experience. I've been welding ship boxes back together for 40 odd years, starting with an 80 amp stick welder. And if you can weld thin sheet metal with a cheap stick welder, you're doing well. By the time you move on to MIG, life gets a lot easier. Now my first MIG was a pretty poor quality set. It was CEM, an Italian thing. And the biggest problem I had with it was when you struck the arc, when you pulled the trigger and the arc fired, it would pull the voltage down inside the set and reduce the speed of the feed roller motor. So you'd get your speed set to what you thought was right, but as soon as you pulled the trigger, the wire speed dropped off. So you had to compensate by turning the wire speed up to more than you wanted, which meant that when you pulled the trigger, The wire hit the job and just came in too fast, hit and shorted dead. It was an awful machine to use. I put up with it for far too many years. In the end, I'd had enough and I bought a better machine. So the first thing, if you're going to do MIG welding, is get the best machine you can buy. Cheap ones don't work very well, especially with MIG. This is the one I've got. I'll just spin the camera around and show you what machine I use. So this is a Segan MIG 180. It's a 180 amp machine. It's got power settings from 1 to 6. Thin sheet metal, I generally work on setting 2. I don't know what the amps and volts settings are. I've just found that setting 2 and about 1.5 to 1.8 on the wire speed. So this is the power control. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is your wire speed. So I found it works best on sheet metal at about 1.6 from 1.8 on that scale. So what else can I tell you about welding? Well, the first thing, you need to be able to see what you're doing. If you can't see it, you can't weld it. You can tack and create pigeon poo snot jobs working blind, but proper welding, good welding, you need to see what you're doing. Now if, like me, you have some vision impairment, it's not major, I'm basically long-sighted nowadays. Close up, I need glasses to focus. These are varifocals, as I've said before. They're awful for welding because welding tends to be close quarters and you end up looking through the bottom of the lens, down your nose, and all you're seeing is the inside of your own welding helmet. So when I'm welding, I put a pair of reading glasses on so that I can see what I'm doing. Personal protection. It took me many years to learn to protect myself. I spent years and years and years welding all sorts of things, got in cars, steel fabrication work, building steel, all sorts. Get yourself a leather welding coat. It will save you loads of pain and misery. Welding burns are not pleasant. The worst ones, the sparks that you see coming off the welding are tiny blobs of molten steel. They are at about 1500 degrees Celsius when they hit you. So they're pretty hot, even though they're tiny, and they can burn into your skin. And I have actually had blobs of metal stuck in my skin in various places. Which I've then had to prise out with a needle and tweezers, and it just, don't do it. Get yourself a coat. Get yourself a good mask. Now this is a basic, these days, basic auto darkening helmet. Perfectly good enough, but it doesn't protect you from the fumes. Now, as I mentioned in another video, the powers that be have now decided that welding fumes are carcinogenic, so you really need to protect yourself. Which is why I bought this. Now this is the cheap setup. This was 600 odd quid. That goes on your back on a belt around your waist. That obviously goes on your head. That's got a battery and a fan in it and a filter, so that sucks in air from behind you, filters it, blows it up that tube and into your mask so that you're breathing clean, fresh air. It also helps to stop your mask steaming up, which is a great thing. Gloves. Always wear gloves when you're welding. It winds me up to see people welding, MIG welding, TIG welding, stick welding without gloves. You are asking for skin cancer in the future. The arc gives off high intensity ultraviolet light which will burn your skin. It's 5 minutes arc welding, whether it be manual metal arc, stick, TIG, MIG. 5 minutes close quarters welding like that is about the same as sitting on a beach on the coast of Spain in July in the blazing sunshine with no sun protection factor cream on. It's silly. I don't know why people do it. Get some gloves, get some good thick gloves, put them on. They will protect you. Your welding torch. Shroud, tip, wire in the middle. Nice and simple. The gas comes out of those holes into the shroud and protects the weld from oxidising as you're going by surrounding it with a mixture. In my case, I use argon CO2 mixture. You could use straight CO2. If you were doing stainless steel or even aluminium, you'd use pure argon. Argon CO2 mix gives a nice weld on mild steel. Straight CO2 works, but it's not great. It doesn't create nice welds. That shroud's tired, so I'm going to replace it. That tip is tired, so I'm going to replace it. The tip's wear. The tip is made out of copper, and as the wire's passing through it, it does wear. It needs to make a good electrical contact with the wire. If it's loose, you'll get arcing inside the tip. And you don't want the arc inside the tip, you want the arc between the wire and the job. So I'm putting a new tip on. I'm throwing caution to the wind and putting a new shroud on. There, fit for the bin. And we're good to go. Right, so the actual art of welding itself, it can be an art, it's a job. Plenty of people are very good at it. I'm quite good at it. I used to be very good at it when I did a lot of it. I don't do so much these days, but I can get by. I can do a decent job. The important thing is not to try to go too fast. You need to go at a reasonable speed. If you go too fast, you're going to get pigeon poo. If you go too slow, you're going to melt the job and get holes. If you watch my last video, you'll also notice that I don't try to do long continuous runs. I do short bursts. The Yanks call it stacking dimes. Usually done with TIG, but you can make MIG look really tidy. You're just building up a series of tacks, one on top of the other. Gives a nice job. You get enough penetration, but you only need to pull the trigger for 1 to 2 seconds at a time. Let it cool for a moment or two, then do the next one. Let it cool, do the next one. If you go along, bzz, 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 you will build up too much heat locally and you will burn through. So it's just do little tacks, 1 to 2 seconds, and let them cool between tacks. You'll also notice I'm wearing a silly hat. This is a proper welding hat. It's flame retardant material. The reason welders wear them backwards is because the peak would get in the way of your welding helmet, but the peak also stops the sparks going down the back of your neck, which is very unpleasant. Right, I think that's as much as I need to say on that. Let's get this floor pan welded. Right, so the floor pan is now in place. I've popped some self-tappers through some of the plug welding holes to pull it down to the chassis rail and around the edges. And I've got just a compression strut in there just to press it down in that corner so that I can get it welded. And then once I've got the rest of the bits welded, I'll pull those self-tappers out and plug weld those holes up. So I'll move you around to the other side so that I can get in and get gluing. Let's get to it. Right, so there we are, that's the new floor pan in, fully welded. I've got a couple of little blow throughs I need to just touch up. Didn't spot them before I put the welder away. But it looks a bit rough and lumpy, but as I've said before, this isn't a concourse restoration, this is a repair to make it solid and strong and safe. So that's about it for this one. I'll get those bits plugged up and give that a coat of etch primer, and it's all welded from top and bottom. It's as strong as it can be. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Maybe you've found something interesting in it. Maybe you found something useful in it. If so, hit the like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.